Transparency is the foundation of accountability. In this segment, you will see unfiltered and unedited reality. We are presenting raw, primary footage directly from the front lines of justice, offering you an objective window into the complexities of the law.
Step out of the vehicle now.
Officer, this is my car. What is the issue?
You think I don't know what I'm looking at? Step out.
I can show you the
People like you don't just roll around in cars like this without answers.
My name is Nadira Osei. I am a federal judge.
And I'm the governor. Out.
At 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon at a Sunoco station off Highway 9 in Beaumont County, Georgia, a white sheriff accused a black woman of stealing her own Cadillac Escalade. The woman was federal judge Nadira Osei, a sitting United States District Court judge with 9 years on the federal bench, a Harvard law degree, and a record of landmark civil rights rulings that had reshaped policy across the Southeast. The sheriff who approached her, Wade Purcell, had already decided, based on her skin color and the price of her vehicle, that she didn't belong behind the wheel. What happened over the next 45 minutes was captured on body camera, gas station surveillance, and multiple bystander cell phones. The footage would go viral within hours. Federal agencies would be mobilized within days, and a sheriff who had operated without accountability for over a decade would finally face the kind of justice he had spent his career denying to others. Judge Nadira Osei had spent the morning visiting her elderly mother in a small rural town about 2 hours south of Atlanta. It was a trip she made once a month, always on a Saturday, always alone. She dressed casually for the drive, jeans and a cream-colored blouse, sunglasses on her head. Her black Cadillac Escalade was registered in her name, paid in full, and had been parked in the same federal courthouse garage every weekday for the past 4 years. She pulled into the Sunoco to fuel up for the last stretch home. She swiped her card, selected the grade, and stood by the pump scrolling through messages on her phone. It was quiet. A few other vehicles at the pumps. A clerk inside behind the counter. Nothing unusual. Then a marked Beaumont County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot and parked at an angle near the air pump. Behind the wheel was Sheriff Wade Purcell, 56 years old, 11 years as the elected sheriff of Beaumont County. His eyes locked on Osei before his engine was off. He watched her for a few seconds, then his gaze moved to the Escalade. He reached for his radio. Possible 1057 at the Sunoco on Highway 9. Black female, late model Escalade. Running the plate now. He didn't wait for dispatch to respond. He was already stepping out of the cruiser, adjusting his belt, and walking toward her. Sheriff Wade Purcell had run Beaumont County like a personal kingdom for more than a decade. He ran unopposed in every election cycle, backed by a network of local officials and business owners who valued order over fairness. In a county where 38% of the population was black, his department was entirely white. Every deputy, every dispatcher, every administrative clerk. It wasn't an accident, it was a culture, and Purcell had built it from the top down. Over his career, 31 formal complaints of racial profiling had been filed against him or his deputies. Every single one had been reviewed internally and dismissed. Black residents had reported being stopped without cause, searched without consent, spoken to with language that left no room for interpretation. None of it had ever led to discipline. 2 prior Department of Justice inquiries had been opened into Beaumont County's policing practices. Both were quietly closed after political pressure from county officials and state-level allies who considered Purcell an asset to their vision of law and order. His deputies modeled his behavior because his behavior was rewarded. In Beaumont County, targeting black residents wasn't a fireable offense. It was standard practice. And the man who set the standard was now walking across a gas station lot toward a woman he had already decided was a criminal. Judge Nadira Osei was not someone who needed a title to command respect, but she had earned one that carried the full weight of the United States government behind it. She had been appointed to the federal bench 9 years earlier, nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate to sit on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Before that, she had spent 14 years as a federal prosecutor, trying cases involving public corruption, organized crime, and civil rights violations. She had argued twice before the United States Supreme Court and won both times. Legal scholars cited her rulings in textbooks. Attorneys across the Southeast knew her name and her reputation for fairness, precision, and an unwillingness to tolerate abusive power in any form. But Nadira Osei was also a black woman, who had grown up 40 minutes from the gas station where she now stood. Her mother had been a school teacher in a county where black teachers were paid less and promoted last. Her father had been a mechanic who built a small shop from nothing and kept it running for 30 years despite permits that were mysteriously delayed and inspections that came twice as often as they did for white-owned businesses down the road. She had watched her parents navigate a system designed to exhaust them into silence. She knew what Beaumont County was. She knew what men like Wade Purcell represented. She had spent her career dismantling the legal structures that protected them. None of that was visible at the pump. No robe, no gavel, no nameplate. She was simply a black woman in jeans standing beside an expensive vehicle in a rural Georgia county. And to Wade Purcell, that was enough. Purcell's boots hit the pavement with the deliberate weight of a man who expected compliance before he opened his mouth. He didn't greet her, didn't introduce himself, didn't ask if she needed help. He stopped 6 feet away, hand resting on his duty belt, and spoke with the flat authority of someone who had never been questioned in his own county. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am." Osei turned from the pump, phone still in one hand. "Excuse me?" Purcell repeated himself, louder this time, his voice carrying across the lot. "I said step away from the vehicle." Before Osei could respond, a second marked cruiser swung into the station and parked at a sharp angle behind her Escalade, blocking her exit. Deputy Kyle Britton, 29 years old, 2 years on the job, stepped out and positioned himself near the rear bumper, one hand on his belt, mirroring his boss. Osei glanced at the blocked vehicle, then back at Purcell. "What is this about?" Purcell's jaw tightened. "This vehicle matches a report of a stolen SUV in the area. I need you to step away now." Osei's voice stayed level. "This is my vehicle. It's registered in my name. I can show you the registration right now. It's in the glove box." Purcell didn't move, didn't acknowledge the offer. His eyes stayed fixed on her face. "I'm not going to ask you again. Step away from the vehicle." A man filling up his truck at the next island stopped and turned. A woman in a minivan lowered her window to watch. Another woman at the pump across from Osei reached for her phone and began recording. The gas station attendant stepped outside the front door and stood with his arms folded, watching in silence. Osei lowered her phone and took one step back from the Escalade. She kept her hands visible. She kept her voice calm. And she kept her eyes on the man who had already decided she was guilty of something she hadn't done. Purcell pointed at the hood of the Escalade. "Hands on the vehicle, now." Osei complied, placing both palms flat on the warm metal. She spoke clearly, her voice loud enough for the bystanders and cameras to hear. "I am complying with your instructions. I have not committed any crime. I am asking you to tell me the specific stolen vehicle report you are referencing." Purcell didn't answer. He jerked his chin toward Britton. "Check the interior." Britton opened the driver's side door without asking for consent, without presenting a warrant, without stating probable cause. He began searching the vehicle methodically, pulling items from the center console, opening the glove compartment, rifling through the back seat. He found a leather garment bag hanging from the rear headrest and unzipped it, revealing a black judicial robe folded neatly inside. He paused for a moment, looked at it, then tossed the bag onto the back seat and kept searching. He pulled out a manila folder thick with legal documents, flipped through several pages without reading them, and dropped them on the passenger seat. He opened Osei's purse, dumped the contents across the console, and sorted through her wallet, keys, lipstick, a small notebook, and a federal courthouse security badge with her photograph and full title printed beneath it. He didn't mention the badge to Purcell. He set it back on the pile and moved to the cargo area. At the pump, Osei stood motionless, palms on the hood, watching the search through the windshield. Her jaw was tight. Her breathing was controlled. 14 years as a federal prosecutor and 9 years on the bench had taught her exactly what was happening. Every element of this stop was illegal. No probable cause, no warrant, no reasonable suspicion that could survive even the lowest standard of judicial scrutiny. She knew it. And she knew the body camera on Purcell's chest was recording every second of it. Purcell's radio crackled. Dispatch responded to his earlier query. The plate came back clean. Vehicle registered to a Nadira A. Osei, residential address in Atlanta. No stolen vehicle flag, no warrants, no alerts of any kind. Purcell heard it. The body camera audio confirmed later that he pressed the radio to his ear, listened, and then lowered it without acknowledging the result. He did not tell Osei what dispatch had said. He did not instruct Britton to stop the search. He did not uncuff her, or step back, or apologize. Instead, he moved closer. The registration doesn't prove anything. You know how many people drive cars that aren't theirs? People like you get behind the wheel of vehicles like this and expect nobody to ask questions. Osei turned her head slightly, still compliant, still controlled. People like me? Purcell ignored the question. I'm going to need your license, registration, and proof of purchase for this vehicle. Osei's voice did not waver. I've already told you. The registration is in the glove box. Your deputy is currently searching my car without my consent. And I am telling you now, clearly and for the record, that I am a federal judge. My judicial credentials are in my bag. You can verify my identity immediately. The body camera captured what happened next with perfect clarity. Purcell's mouth curled into a half smile. He tilted his head slightly, and then he laughed. A short, dismissive sound that carried across the lot. Sure you are, sweetheart. Britton, still leaning into the cargo area of the Escalade, glanced back over his shoulder and smirked. Neither of them checked the credentials. Neither of them ran her name. Neither of them paused for even a moment to consider that the woman standing with her palms on the hood of a fully paid-for Cadillac might be exactly who she said she was. The woman at the next pump kept recording. Her phone had been steady for over 4 minutes now. A second bystander, a young man in a work uniform, had started filming from near the air pump. The gas station's 4 exterior surveillance cameras continued their silent rotation, capturing every angle of a stop that had no legal basis and an interrogation that had just crossed the line from which there would be no walking back. Osei looked directly at Purcell. Her voice was quiet, but carried the precision of someone who had spent decades choosing words that would hold up under scrutiny. You are making a mistake you will not be able to undo. Purcell leaned in closer. The body camera recorded his face inches from hers. The only mistake here is your attitude. Purcell reached for her arm. Turn around. Osei turned slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. For what reason am I being detained? Purcell didn't answer. He grabbed her left wrist and pulled it behind her back, then reached for her right. The motion was rough, unnecessary, the kind of force designed not to restrain, but to humiliate. Osei's shoulder twisted at an awkward angle as he yanked both arms together. She winced, but did not cry out. I am not resisting. I am complying with your instructions. I have committed no crime, and I do not consent to this detention. Purcell snapped the cuffs on. The metal bit into her wrists. He tightened them 1 click past where they needed to be. The body camera captured the sound, a sharp metallic ratchet that echoed against the concrete. He pushed her forward toward his cruiser. His hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades, forcing her to move faster than her footing allowed. Her sandal caught the edge of the curb, and she stumbled forward, both knees hitting the asphalt hard. Without her hands free to break the fall, her full weight landed on the pavement. The skin on both knees split open against the rough surface. Blood appeared immediately on her jeans. Purcell did not stop, did not ask if she was hurt, did not help her up. He grabbed her arm above the elbow and hauled her to her feet, then continued walking her toward the cruiser. Get in. Britton opened the rear door. Osei ducked her head and lowered herself into the back seat, Wrists throbbing, knees burning, the smell of hot vinyl and stale air surrounding her. The door slammed shut. The sound was final and heavy, the sound of a locked cage closing around a woman whose only crime was existing in a space where someone with a badge had decided she did not belong. At the pumps, the woman with the phone whispered to her husband, "Oh my God." The young man in the work uniform had moved closer, his camera capturing the blood on Osei's knees as she was walked to the cruiser. The gas station attendant stood frozen in the doorway, arms still folded, face tight with the expression of someone who had seen this kind of thing before, but never quite like this. A white couple leaving the station slowed their car to a stop, the passenger rolling down her window, staring. No one intervened. No one said a word loud enough for Purcell to hear. The authority of the badge held everyone at a distance, even as every phone in that lot recorded evidence that would eventually tear that authority apart. Inside the cruiser, Osei sat still. Her back was straight despite the cuffs pulling her shoulders into an unnatural position. Her knees bled through the denim. Her wrists were already beginning to swell where the metal dug in. The windows were closed. The air conditioning was off. The Georgia afternoon pressed heat through the glass and turned the back seat into something close to an oven. She asked to make a phone call. Purcell, leaning against the driver's side door outside, didn't turn around. No. She asked again. "I have a right to contact my attorney." "You'll get your call when I say you get your call." She asked for a supervisor. Purcell turned his head just enough for the body camera to catch the edge of his expression. "I am the supervisor." She asked for his badge number. He said nothing. She asked for his full name. Silence. She asked what charges she was being held on. Purcell walked away from the cruiser and stood near the pump island, talking to Britton in a voice too low for the body camera to pick up clearly. Osei sat in that back seat for 38 minutes. No charges were read. No Miranda rights were given. No booking process was initiated. No one brought water. No one checked her injuries. No one cracked a window. She was a sitting United States federal judge locked in the back of a county sheriff's cruiser at a gas station in broad daylight, and the man who put her there had not even bothered to confirm her name. At the 20-minute mark, Purcell returned to the cruiser. He leaned into the open window and looked at her the way a man looks at someone he considers beneath his time. You should have just shown some respect. This didn't have to go this way. Osei met his eyes through the partition. Her voice was raw from the heat, but steady. "You detained me without cause. You searched my vehicle without a warrant. You used force on a compliant individual. You denied me the right to counsel. And you are recording all of it on your own body camera." Purcell stared at her for a long moment. Then he straightened up and walked back to Britton. Meanwhile, the video had already escaped the gas station. The woman at the pump, a retired schoolteacher named Yvonne Shelton, had posted her recording to Facebook with a single caption. They just arrested a black woman at the Sunoco for driving her own car. Within 30 minutes, the video had 40,000 views. Within an hour, it had been shared by 3 civil rights organizations and picked up by a local news affiliate. By the time Osei was still sitting in that back seat, hands going numb and blood drying on her jeans, the world was already watching what Wade Purcell had done. He just didn't know it yet. It was Britton who broke first. He had been standing near the hood of the cruiser, scrolling through his phone, while Purcell leaned against the pump island, chewing on a toothpick, when something on the screen made his face change. He looked up at Purcell, then back at the phone, then back at Purcell again. "We need to run her name." Purcell shrugged. "We ran the plate. That's enough." Britton's voice dropped. "Wade, we need to run her name. Right now." Something in the deputy's tone made Purcell push off the island. He walked over and looked at Britton's phone. Britton had pulled up the Federal Judiciary Directory. On the screen was a photograph of Nadira A. Osei, United States District Judge, Northern District of Georgia. The face in the photo matched the woman in the back of his cruiser. Purcell stared at the screen for a long time. The body camera recorded the pause. It captured him blinking twice. It captured his hand reaching for the back of his neck. It captured the silence that stretched between two men who had just realized the magnitude of what they had done. Britton whispered, "She told us. She told us who she was." Purcell said nothing. He turned and walked slowly to the cruiser. He opened the rear door. He reached in and unlocked the cuffs without making eye contact. The metal fell away from her wrists, leaving deep red impressions in skin that had already begun to bruise. "You're free to go." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the blood on her knees, the swelling on her wrists, the 38 minutes in a sealed car in Georgia heat. No mention of the illegal search, the fabricated stolen vehicle claim, the laughter when she identified herself. Just 4 words, delivered in a flat tone, designed to close a door on something that was already far too large to contain. Osei stepped out of the cruiser. She stood in the lot and looked at Purcell for a long moment. The body camera captured her face, calm and unbroken despite everything. Her voice carried clearly across the pavement. "You were not free of what you just did." She did not wait for a response. She walked to her Escalade, where her belongings were still scattered across the seats from Britton's warrantless search. She collected her purse, her judicial credentials, her robe bag, her legal files. She placed everything back where it belonged with the quiet precision of a woman who understood that order mattered, that evidence mattered, that every detail from this moment forward would be scrutinized under a standard of review far higher than anything Wade Purcell had ever encountered. She got in the car. She started the engine. She pulled out of the Sunoco station and turned north toward Atlanta. But she did not go home. She drove directly to the FBI field office on Century Parkway. She walked in with blood still visible on her jeans and bruises forming on both wrists. She identified herself by name and title. She requested to speak with the special agent in charge, and within the hour, she was sitting in a secure room giving a detailed, sworn statement about everything that had happened at the gas station off Highway 9 in Beaumont County, Georgia. She brought her judicial credentials, her vehicle registration, her insurance documents, and photographs of her injuries taken on her phone in the Sunoco parking lot before she left. She provided the names she had memorized: Sheriff Wade Purcell, Deputy Kyle Britton. She provided the time of the stop, the duration of the detention, the specific words used. She recounted every statement, every refusal, every violation of the constitutional rights she had spent her career upholding for others, and that had just been stripped from her in a gas station parking lot by a man who laughed when she told him who she was. The FBI agent taking her statement asked if she wanted to pause. She said no. She said, "I want every word on the record." By Monday morning, the machinery of federal accountability was fully in motion. FBI special agents from the Atlanta field office had been formally assigned to the case. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division had been notified and had opened a preliminary inquiry before noon. The chief judge of the Northern District of Georgia, after being briefed on the incident over the weekend, issued a public statement that moved through legal circles like a shockwave. What happened to Judge Osei is not merely a personal injustice. It is an assault on the federal judiciary and the constitutional principles every officer of the law is sworn to uphold. The statement was unprecedented. Federal judges rarely commented publicly on active investigations. The fact that the chief judge had spoken at all signaled to every attorney, every agency, and every elected official paying attention that this case would not be handled quietly. Body camera footage was subpoenaed from the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department by 10 a.m. Monday. A federal preservation order was issued simultaneously, prohibiting any deletion, alteration, or transfer of digital files from the department's servers. Gas station surveillance footage was secured by FBI agents who arrived at the Sunoco before the morning shift change. The station manager provided full access without hesitation. 4 exterior cameras had captured the entire encounter from multiple angles, timestamps synchronized, resolution clear enough to read the text on Purcell's badge from 30 feet away. Bystander videos, now circulating across every major social media platform with a combined view count exceeding 6 million, were cataloged and entered into the evidentiary record. Yvonne Shelton, the retired teacher who had posted the first video, was contacted by federal investigators and provided a detailed witness statement along with the original, unedited file from her phone. But the body camera footage was the centerpiece. It was Purcell's own equipment, department-issued, department-maintained, activated by his own hand before he stepped out of the cruiser. It captured his radio call to dispatch before he had any interaction with Osei. It captured dispatch confirming the vehicle was not stolen. It captured him continuing the stop anyway. It captured the words "people like you" and the laugh after she identified herself as a federal judge. It captured the cuffs, the fall, the blood, the 38 minutes in a sealed cruiser, and the flat, unapologetic dismissal at the end. And then the scope of the investigation expanded beyond the gas station. Federal agents requested access to the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department's full complaint history, internal review records, personnel files, and dispatch logs going back 10 years. The county attorney initially attempted to push back, citing administrative burden. The U.S. Attorney's Office responded with a federal subpoena that arrived before the county attorney finished drafting his objection. What investigators found inside those records would turn one sheriff's worst day into the beginning of a reckoning that reached far beyond a single gas station in rural Georgia. The records told a story that the people of Beaumont County had been trying to tell for years. Nobody with the power to act had ever listened. Now, with federal investigators pulling files from every cabinet and server in the department, the full scope of what Wade Purcell had built became impossible to ignore. Traffic stop data showed that black drivers in Beaumont County were stopped at 7 times the rate of white drivers. In a county where black residents made up 38% of the population, they accounted for 81% of vehicle searches and 74% of roadside detentions. The numbers alone were damning. The details behind them were worse. 3 black men had been arrested on fraudulent stolen vehicle claims in the past 2 years alone. Each had been driving a late-model vehicle. Each had been stopped without a specific report or dispatch confirmation. Each had been cuffed, searched, and held for hours before being released without charges. None of them had received an apology. None of them had been told the basis for the stop. Their complaints had been filed internally and dismissed within days. A black-owned barbershop on the east side of town had been raided 8 months earlier on an anonymous tip alleging drug activity. Deputies entered without a warrant, forced the owner and 6 customers to the ground, and searched the entire premises. They found nothing. The shop owner filed a complaint. Internal Affairs reviewed it and concluded the officers had acted in good faith based on the information available. The anonymous tip was never traced or verified. A 17-year-old black teenager named Elijah Cook had been detained after a Friday night football game for matching a description. The description, according to the incident report, was a black male in dark clothing. Elijah was held for 14 hours in a holding cell without charges, without his parents being notified, and without access to a phone. When his mother finally located him the next morning, she was told it had been a misunderstanding. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. Federal investigators found 31 formal complaints of racial profiling filed against the department over the past decade. Every single one had been reviewed by the same internal affairs process. Every single one had been dismissed. The review files were thin, sometimes only a single page. Several contained identical language copied from one dismissal to the next, as if the conclusion had been written before the investigation began. Dashcam footage from routine traffic stops revealed deputies using racial slurs during interactions with black motorists. In one recording, a deputy could be heard telling a black driver pulled over for a broken taillight, "You're lucky I'm in a good mood today. Next time, stay in your part of town." The footage had been uploaded to the department server and never reviewed by anyone. Internal emails painted the clearest picture of all. Investigators found a chain between Purcell and his senior deputies discussing how to handle what one deputy called problem complaints. Purcell's response was direct. File it, flag it, forget it. If they don't have a lawyer, it goes nowhere. In another email, a sergeant asked Purcell how to handle a business owner's request to keep certain people from loitering near a shopping plaza. Purcell replied, "Use discretion. If they don't belong, move them along. We support our business community." The sergeant's subsequent incident reports showed that every person moved along from that plaza over the following 6 months was black. 2 prior Department of Justice inquiries had been opened into Beaumont County's policing practices. Both had been initiated after clusters of complaints reached federal attention. Both had been quietly closed after county officials and state-level political allies intervened, characterizing the complaints as isolated incidents driven by anti-law enforcement sentiment. The DOJ attorneys assigned to those inquiries had recommended further investigation. Their recommendations had been overruled. The picture that emerged was not of a single bad stop at a gas station. It was a system. Built by one man, sustained by silence, protected by a structure that treated complaints from black residents as noise to be managed rather than evidence to be examined. Wade Purcell had not made a mistake that Saturday afternoon. He had done what he always did. The only difference was that this time, the woman he did it to had the power, the knowledge, and the standing to ensure that the system he built would be the thing that buried him. By the time federal investigators finished cataloging the evidence, the case had grown far beyond the Sunoco station, and the grand jury that would soon convene would not be hearing about one sheriff's bad afternoon. They would be hearing about a decade of institutionalized racism operating under the protection of a badge in a county where accountability had never once walked through the door. Until now. A federal grand jury was convened in the Northern District of Georgia 6 weeks after the gas station incident. The proceedings were sealed, but the scope of the investigation had already become unmistakable to anyone paying attention. FBI agents had spent weeks inside the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department, removing hard drives, copying server archives, interviewing current and former deputies, and collecting sworn statements from dozens of residents who had filed complaints over the years that had gone nowhere. The indictment, when it came, was devastating. Sheriff Wade Purcell was charged on multiple counts: deprivation of civil rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. paragraph 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, 18 U.S.C. paragraph 241, false imprisonment, filing false official reports. Each count carried significant federal prison time. Together, they represented a systematic dismantling of the legal shield Purcell had worn for over a decade. Deputy Kyle Britton was indicted as a co-conspirator, charged with deprivation of civil rights and failure to intervene during an unlawful detention. His participation in the warrantless search of Osei's vehicle and his silence during the 38-minute detention formed the core of the charges against him. Prosecutors noted that Britton had multiple opportunities to intervene, to check Osei's credentials, to report the dispatch confirmation that the vehicle was not stolen, to stop the cuffs from going on. He had done none of those things. 2 additional deputies, Carl Jessup and Aaron Lott, were charged in connection with prior incidents uncovered during the federal investigation. Jessup had conducted the warrantless raid on the black-owned barbershop. Lott had detained 17-year-old Elijah Cook for 14 hours without charges or parental notification. Both had operated under Purcell's explicit guidance. Both had filed reports that investigators determined contained deliberate falsehoods designed to justify actions that had no legal basis. The arrest of Wade Purcell was carried out at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning at the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department. Federal agents entered through the front door and walked past the reception desk where complaints from black residents had been filed and forgotten for years. They found Purcell in his office, coffee on his desk, framed commendations on the wall. He was read his rights, handcuffed, and escorted out of the building through the same front entrance he had walked through every morning for 11 years. The agents led him past his own deputies, past the dispatch desk, past the evidence room where body camera footage had been stored and never reviewed. His mugshot was taken at the Federal Processing Facility in Atlanta and released to the press by noon. It led every news broadcast in the state. The image showed a man who looked smaller than he had at the gas station. The confidence was gone. The badge was gone. The authority that had allowed him to laugh in the face of a federal judge was gone. What remained was a 56-year-old man in a federal holding facility, facing charges that could put him away for the rest of his functional career and define his name for the rest of his life. Britton was arrested the same morning. He did not resist. He said nothing during processing. His attorney released a statement calling the charges excessive and promising a vigorous defense. The statement convinced no one who had seen the footage. Jessup and Lott were arrested later that afternoon. Both were booked and released on bond. Both were stripped of their badges and firearms. Both were barred from entering the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department pending trial. In the span of a single morning, the department that had operated without oversight for over a decade lost its sheriff, a deputy, and 2 senior officers to federal indictments. The remaining staff were placed under the temporary supervision of the county administrator, who appeared at a brief press conference that evening and read a prepared statement that used the word accountability 4 times, without once acknowledging what had made it necessary. Back in Atlanta, Judge Osai was informed of the arrests through official channels. She made no public statement. She issued no comment to the media. She returned to her bench the following day and presided over her scheduled docket as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and the trial that would follow would ensure that the change was permanent. The federal trial of Wade Purcell began on a Monday morning in the same courthouse where Judge Nadira Osai had presided over cases for 9 years. She had recused herself as required. A visiting judge from the 11th Circuit was appointed to oversee the proceedings. The courtroom was full. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Reporters lined the back wall. Federal marshals stood at each exit. Outside, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps, holding signs and waiting for updates that would be relayed through the glass doors every time someone stepped out. The prosecution opened with the body camera footage. They played it from the beginning. The radio call to dispatch before Purcell had even stepped out of his cruiser. The approach. The command to step away from the vehicle. Osei's calm, repeated attempts to explain that the car was hers. Britton blocking her exit. The warrantless search. The credentials pulled from her bag and ignored. The dispatch confirmation that the vehicle was not stolen. Purcell's decision to continue anyway. The courtroom was silent as the footage played on 2 large monitors positioned for the jury and the gallery. The jury watched Purcell's hand shove Osei toward the cruiser. They heard the sound of her knees hitting asphalt. They saw the blood appear on her jeans. They watched her sit in a sealed cruiser for 38 minutes without charges, without water, without a cracked window in the Georgia heat. They heard Purcell tell her she should have shown some respect, and they heard him laugh when she told him she was a federal judge. The sound of that laugh hung in the courtroom like a verdict that had already been delivered. Then the prosecution played the dispatch audio. The jury listened to the confirmation that Osei's vehicle was clean, registered in her name, no flags, no warrants, no stolen vehicle report matching the Escalade. They listened to the timestamp. They noted that the confirmation came before the cuffs, before the search, before the fall. Purcell had known the car was not stolen, and he had continued anyway. Prosecutors then broadened the case beyond the gas station. They presented body camera footage from 22 other incidents involving Purcell and his deputies. The jury watched a montage of black residents being stopped, searched, detained, and humiliated across Beaumont County over a span of years. They watched the barbershop raid. They watched Elijah Cook, 17 years old, being led into a holding cell for matching a description that could have applied to half the young men in the county. They watched deputies using language on dashcam audio that made several jurors visibly recoil. 19 victims took the stand over the course of the trial. They described stops without cause, searches without consent, hours in detention without charges, language that made clear the only thing suspicious about them was the color of their skin. A woman named Gloria Fenton described being pulled from her car during a school pickup because her sedan looked like one reportedly involved in a hit-and-run 3 counties away. She was handcuffed in front of her 2 children. The report turned out to be for a vehicle of a different make and color. No apology was offered. Her complaint was dismissed in 4 days. A man named Samuel Drayton described being stopped while jogging in his own neighborhood. A deputy told him someone had reported a suspicious person. Drayton was wearing a reflective vest and running shoes. He was detained for 40 minutes. His complaint was filed internally and marked resolved, with no action taken. Each testimony built upon the last. Each one revealed the same pattern, and each one pointed to the same source. Judge Osai testified on the 9th day of the trial. She wore a dark suit, no robe, no insignia of office. She sat in the witness chair and recounted the events of that Saturday afternoon with the same calm precision she had shown at the gas station. She described the approach, the commands, the search, the cuffs, the fall, the 38 minutes in the cruiser. She described asking for a phone call and being denied. She described asking for a supervisor and being told Purcell was the supervisor. She described asking for his badge number and receiving silence. When the prosecutor asked how she felt during the detention, she paused for the first time. I have spent my career in courtrooms ensuring that the Constitution applies equally to every person in this country. In the back of that cruiser, with my hands cuffed and my knees bleeding, I understood for the first time what it feels like when it doesn't. The defense attempted to frame the stop as a legitimate response to a stolen vehicle concern. Purcell's attorney argued that his client had acted on reasonable suspicion and had followed department protocols for vehicle stops. The strategy collapsed almost immediately. Use of force experts testified that nothing in the encounter met the legal threshold for a Terry stop, let alone a full detention with handcuffs. Constitutional law professors explained that dispatch had confirmed the vehicle was not stolen before the cuffs were applied, eliminating any claim of reasonable suspicion. A former FBI behavioral analyst reviewed the body camera footage and identified what she described as targeted enforcement behavior, noting that Purcell's language, posture, and decision-making were consistent not with an officer investigating a crime, but with an officer acting on racial bias. Purcell took the stand in his own defense on the 3rd week. His attorney walked him through the event slowly, attempting to present each action as measured and procedural. But under cross-examination, the facade fell apart. The prosecutor played the moment Purcell laughed at Osei's identification and asked him to explain what was funny. Purcell said he didn't recall laughing. The prosecutor replayed the audio. The jury watched Purcell's face as his own voice filled the courtroom. He had no answer. The prosecutor asked why he continued the detention after dispatch confirmed the vehicle was not stolen. Purcell said he wanted to be thorough. The prosecutor asked how 38 minutes in a sealed car without charges, water, or a phone call constituted thoroughness. Purcell did not respond. The prosecutor asked about the phrase, "people like you." Purcell said it referred to people who drive expensive vehicles, not to race. The prosecutor then played 4 dash cam recordings from other stops in which Purcell or his deputies used the same phrase, each time directed at a black motorist. Purcell stared at the table in front of him and said nothing. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was unanimous on every count. Guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of false imprisonment. Guilty of filing false reports. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Several of the victims in the gallery held each other. A woman in the second row covered her mouth and wept. Purcell stood motionless as the verdicts were read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Purcell did not react. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, speaking to a courtroom that was once again full, addressed Purcell directly. "You took an oath to uphold the law and instead used your badge as a weapon against the people you swore to protect. You did not do this once. You did it systematically, repeatedly, and without remorse, targeting citizens based on the color of their skin and relying on a system you built to ensure that no one would ever hold you accountable." Purcell was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. the maximum under the guidelines for the combined charges. Britton, who had pleaded guilty before trial in a cooperation agreement, received 3 years. Deputies Carl Jessup and Aaron Lott each received 18 months after entering guilty pleas and providing testimony that corroborated the pattern of directed enforcement under Purcell's command. Purcell was taken into federal custody immediately. He did not speak. He did not look at the gallery. He was led out through a side door in handcuffs, the same way he had led Nadira Osei to the back of his cruiser 2 months earlier. Except this time, there was no one to open the door and say he was free to go. The civil lawsuit was filed before the criminal trial concluded. Judge Osei was the lead plaintiff, but she was not alone. 34 additional plaintiffs joined the suit, each one a resident of Beaumont County who had been subjected to unlawful stops, searches, detentions, or harassment by Purcell's department over the preceding decade. Their cases had been documented during the federal investigation. Their complaints, once dismissed and buried, were now exhibits in a federal civil rights action. The suit named Sheriff Wade Purcell individually, Deputy Kyle Britton individually, Deputies Carl Jessup and Aaron Lott individually, and the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department as an institution. It cited unlawful detention, excessive force, racial profiling, warrantless search and seizure, denial of due process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and systemic discrimination in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments and 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The county's attorneys reviewed the evidence and understood immediately that there was no viable defense. The body camera footage from the gas station alone was indefensible. Combined with the footage from 22 other incidents, the internal emails, the complaint dismissal records, and the statistical data on racially disparate enforcement, the case was not one the county could survive at trial. Settlement negotiations were brief. The county agreed to pay $4.7 million. The amount was divided among the 35 plaintiffs based on the severity of the violations each had suffered. Judge Osei's portion was the largest, but she had made clear from the beginning that the money was not the point. The point was the consent decree. The terms imposed on Beaumont County were the most sweeping police reform measures the district had ever seen. The entire sheriff's department was placed under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years. An independent civilian review board was created with full subpoena power, the authority to investigate complaints, and the ability to recommend termination of officers found to have engaged in misconduct. Every deputy in the department was required to complete mandatory bias training with quarterly evaluations. Those who failed were subject to immediate suspension and review. Body camera activation was made mandatory for every citizen interaction, every call for service, and every enforcement action, with severe penalties including termination for non-compliance. All body camera footage from business-related calls and traffic stops was to be reviewed monthly by the Civilian Oversight Board. Demographic data on all stops, searches, and detentions was to be collected and published in quarterly public reports. A zero-tolerance policy was codified for selective enforcement, requiring documented, articulable legal justification for every removal, detention, or arrest. The hiring practices of the department were overhauled. Within a year, the department that had operated for over a decade as an entirely white force added 11 black officers to its ranks, including its first black deputy chief, a 20-year law enforcement veteran named Camille Pryor, who had previously served with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Pryor's first act was to reopen every dismissed complaint from the past 10 years for independent review. The $4.7 million settlement included a separate $400,000 compensation fund designated for the 47 individuals identified during the federal investigation as victims of discriminatory enforcement who had not been part of the original lawsuit. Each was contacted individually, informed of the fund, and offered access to legal counsel provided at no cost through a partnership with the ACLU of Georgia. Purcell's name was removed from the Beaumont County Law Enforcement Memorial, where it had been engraved 5 years earlier during a ceremony attended by the same county officials who had helped close the prior DOJ inquiries. The plaque was replaced with a simple inscription: "This department serves all residents of Beaumont County equally and without prejudice. The law belongs to everyone." Back in Atlanta, Judge Osai reviewed the consent decree through official channels. She made no public comment on the settlement. She issued no statement to the press. She returned to her courtroom and continued her work. But through her attorneys, she ensured that one additional provision was included in the final agreement. Every new deputy hired by the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department would be required, on their first day, to watch the body camera footage from the Sunoco station in its entirety. All 45 minutes of it. From the radio call before Purcell left his cruiser, to the moment he uncuffed a federal judge and told her she was free to go without ever once saying he was sorry. The provision was accepted without objection. Weeks later, Judge Nadira Osei returned to a routine that from the outside looked unchanged. She drove to the courthouse each morning, presided over her docket, reviewed briefs, issued rulings. Her colleagues treated her no differently. Her clerks asked no questions. The work of the federal bench continued, as it always had, steady, deliberate, and bound by the principle that the law applied equally to every person who stood before it. She did not give interviews. She did not appear on cable news panels or accept invitations to speak at rallies. She declined every request for comment from journalists who wanted her to become a symbol of something larger than what had happened to her. She had never needed the public to validate her authority. The Constitution did that. And the record she had built over 9 years on the bench spoke louder than any headline ever could. But at a private bar association dinner held that fall in Atlanta, attended by judges, attorneys, and legal scholars from across the Southeast, she was asked to say a few words. She stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room for a moment before speaking. He looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. I looked at him and saw a system that had never been held accountable. Now it has. She returned to her seat. The room was silent for a long moment before the applause began. In Beaumont County, the changes moved slowly, but they moved. The Civilian Oversight Board held its first public meeting 4 months after the consent decree was signed. Residents who had never attended a government meeting filled the room. Some of them brought the complaint forms they had filed years earlier, the ones that had been dismissed with identical language and forgotten in filing cabinets. They wanted the new board to see what had been ignored. The board accepted every document. Deputy Chief Camille Pryor led the department's transition with the kind of quiet authority that came from 2 decades of doing the work without needing to perform it. She reviewed every open case file, reassigned patrol routes to eliminate the concentration of enforcement in predominantly black neighborhoods, and implemented a ride-along program that paired new deputies with community leaders during their first month on the job. She did not give speeches about reform. She simply changed how the department operated. One policy, one hire, one interaction at a time. The Sunoco station on Highway 9 still sold gas. The pump still hummed on Saturday afternoons. The same concrete lot where Osei's knees had bled was patched and repainted that spring, though not because of the incident. The station manager never spoke publicly about what happened, but regular customers noticed that the exterior surveillance system was upgraded to 8 cameras within a month of the trial, and a small handwritten sign appeared taped to the inside of the cashier's window that read, "All customers are welcome here." Yvonne Shelton, the retired school teacher who had posted the first video, was interviewed by a documentary crew that fall. She sat in her living room with her hands folded in her lap and said, "I didn't do anything special. I just kept the camera on. That's all it takes sometimes. You just don't look away." Her video, the original Facebook post with the single-line caption, remained online. It had been viewed over 14 million times. Wade Purcell served his sentence at a federal correctional facility in central Georgia. He did not give interviews. He did not issue a public apology. He did not write to Judge Osai or to any of the 47 victims identified during the investigation. Through his attorney, he maintained that he had been doing his job and that the prosecution was politically motivated. The statement was reported once and forgotten. His name, however, was not. It appeared in law enforcement training materials distributed to police academies across 3 states. It appeared in civil rights law textbooks used at 14 universities. It appeared in a DOJ brief cited in 2 subsequent federal cases involving racially motivated policing. He would carry it for the rest of his life. Not the badge, not the title, just the name, attached permanently to a body camera recording that showed a man in uniform laughing at a black woman who told him she was a federal judge. Kyle Britton served his 3-year sentence and was released to a world that had no place for him in law enforcement. His certification was permanently revoked. He moved out of state and did not return to Beaumont County. Jessup and Lott served their 18-month sentences and similarly disappeared from public life. None of them issued apologies. None of them demonstrated any understanding of the harm the body camera had captured so clearly. In the new Civilian Oversight Office in Beaumont County, a framed photograph hung on the wall opposite the entrance. It had been taken from the gas station's exterior surveillance camera, a wide-angle shot showing a black woman in handcuffs standing beside a black Cadillac Escalade. An American flag hung from the awning above her. A sheriff's cruiser sat parked at an angle behind her vehicle, blocking her in. The image was sharp and unambiguous. Beneath it, a single line was printed in plain black text on a white card. Accountability begins where arrogance ends. No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. The record was already written. And the woman in the photograph was already back on the bench, doing the work she had always done, in a country that still needed her to do it. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.
Uncovering the truth is more important now than ever. Our goal is to hold power to account by letting the evidence speak for itself. The records don't lie. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey.